Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Comp 1 students. So, as I'm preparing for this lecture today, there's supposed to be some wintry weather hitting. So, I'm going to work on getting through this as quickly as possible, but not speed through it so you don't understand what's going on. But I want to talk today for this last essay about arguments and how to write them. You may be familiar with arguments, you may not. That is something that I want to discuss though and go over with you so you are aware of how to approach argumentative writing in a more academic setting because you are in college and that is an academic setting. So first off, let's discuss arguments themselves. Some questions we need to answer about an argument is, what is an argument? For many of you, your idea of an argument is yelling and screaming until you either get your way or you don't. If you have a toddler, it's like hostage negotiation, making arguments with them. But an argument itself is actually just making reasonable claims, and the keyword there is reasonable, and then backing up those claims with evidence and support. Without evidence and support, you have no argument. And without a reasonable claim, you have no argument. Then you need to ask yourself, what is the objective of the argument? Because there is always going to be an objective to any argument you engage in. Most of the time, when we engage in arguments, our objective we feel like is to win or prove that you're right and others are wrong. But the object is not to just win. You are wanting to persuade people to believe the point you are making, not win the argument. Your primary goal, what is that whenever you're writing arguments? Your primary goal as a writer and arguer is to show others that you are probably right and that your beliefs are just reasonable. Again, you heard that word reasonable. Reasonable beliefs are going to be key here in any argument you make. And then last but not least is, what is the purpose? Gotta have a purpose, right? Your purpose is to explore two or more sides of a controversial topic and then argue fairly and reasonably for one side over the others. Always remember that arguments are neither right or wrong, black or white. There's not that kind of binary in argumentative topics. There's always a spectrum of how the argument works in the argument that you're going to make. When you are deepening your argument, when you are making your argument, it will help you deepen, there we go, your understanding, and it may even influence how you think about the position itself. You may go into a topic believing one thing and then come out thinking completely differently, and that is fine. Both sides, when arguing, are trying to attempt to convince each other that they have the stronger position in the point that they're trying to make, and that the position is more beneficial. Sometimes, though, you do not achieve that, and sometimes you have to strive for an agreement or a compromise in your arguments. There's not a one person has the better argument. It is a, well, I need to better my argument itself. In college and the professional world, because that is where you are and that is where you're going into, or you may already be in the professional world. Arguments are about getting things done by gaining the cooperation of others. Again, not about proving you're right and everybody else is wrong. You want people to cooperate and believe in what you're saying, and you want them to do what you're asking of them. If you go into an argument with the idea of I'm right, they're wrong, it's going to make it a more difficult argument to make. So always go into it with the idea that you want their cooperation. Arguments are as much about agreeing as they are disagreeing with other people, as much about cooperating with them as they are competing with them. So keep that in mind. You are always going to disagree and you are always going to agree on things. Just depends on the point and how you're making it. When you argue, you need to be able to present all your viewpoints fairly, though. That is part of your primary goal. I mentioned your claim has to be reasonable, and you also have to be fair and reasonable to the opposition. Many of you may sit here and think, why do I need to be fair and reasonable to them? They're the opposition. But if somebody is trying to present your viewpoint and they're not doing it fairly or reasonably, you are not going to want to listen to them. And your reader, when they read your essays or when they read your argument will say, okay, they're looking at this and they're making all the points and they're conceding knowledge. I can trust this person and what they're saying and maybe agree with them in the long run. And that is going to help you be able to effectively and persuasively argue, which is the skill set that you are going to need throughout life. You guys already do these things. So I want to continue on with it and perfect it for you guys. Let's talk first about the basic parts of an argument. You guys are very familiar with these, potentially, if you have done them in high school, and you may not be familiar, or it may have been so long ago that you're like, oh, I don't remember this, Miss Cravens. That's okay. This is like a little refresher for you. Let's talk, though, about the argument itself and what an effective argument is first. So an effective argument is a logical, well-thought-out presentation of ideas that make a claim about an issue and then support that claim with evidence. So it's a logical presentation of ideas that make a claim with issue and support. Okay? So your idea, claim, support. Idea, claim, support. An effective argument is clearly going to state an issue, it's going to make a claim, and then it offers support. You must also, in your argument, recognize or refute the opposing viewpoints. So let's look at the four basic parts of an argument. There's the issue, the claim, the support, and the refutation. The issue is a controversy, problem, or an idea about which people hold different viewpoints. For any argument, a topic must be controversial and relevant. So make sure your issue is both. Discussing things that are not relevant is not making an argument, it's just discussing historical fact, potentially. So you want to make sure it's a relevant topic, things that are going on now that are affecting you or people. When you look at the claim is the point that you're trying to prove. The point is usually your view on the issue. Usually. Sometimes people will argue the opposite, though, because they like to challenge themselves. The claim is going to wind up being your thesis statement. The issue is your topic, the claim is your thesis statement. When you look at this in terms of an essay. We do have three types of claims that exist, though. There are claims of fact, which are statements that can be proved or verified through scholarly, trustworthy sources. And we're going to talk about sources later on and using and citing them, so don't panic about that. There are claims of value that are statements that express an opinion or judgment about whether one thing or idea is better or more desirable than others. Then you have claims of policy, which are statements offering one or more solutions to a problem. You are most used to writing a claim that is a claim of fact. You're making a statement and you're going to prove it. This essay is going to be a claim of policy, where you're going to discuss a problem and the solutions to it. Then you have your support. That's going to be the body of your essay. The support consists of ideas and information that's intended to convince the reader, not yourself, that your claim is sound or believable. Okay? So you have to look up information. And again, we were going to talk about using and citing sources later, but this ties into that. Support is going to include things like reasons, which are general statements that back up claims. Reasons alone are not sufficient. So if I say that, I hate coming up with things off the top of my head, guys. My child must wear a coat outside because it is cold. That's just a general statement. It backs up my claim about my kid having to wear a coat. I'm going to need evidence that proves, though, of why she needs to do that. So evidence consists of facts, statistics, examples, expert opinions, and observations from personal experience. My evidence would be the temperature outside. It's like 50 or below degrees outside. You're going to need a jacket, kiddo. Emotional appeals are going to evoke the needs or values that readers like to share. You can use those in your support. You can do this by appealing to people's needs, which are things like physiological needs, food, drink, health, shelter, safety, sex, and psychological needs. their sense of belonging or accomplishment, self-esteem, recognition. You can be appealing to people's values a quality or principle that's considered important, worthwhile, or desirable. Most of the time, when you use appealing like to the emotional thing, you can use it sparingly. You will have your reasoning and you will have your evidence that will back up that reasoning in your essay. Occasionally, you'll use your emotional appeals. And then last, there's the refutation that is part of an argument. The refutation, which is also called a rebuttal, recognizes and argues against opposing viewpoints. If the argument itself is too strong to refute, so you cannot argue against it because your claim is weaker, you can acknowledge it by stating it. They say this, it is the better point to make for this part. Or you can accommodate the opposing view by noting that it has merit. Okay, they say this and their point is good, but maybe we can change this to better that point. You can modify it that way. But you always need to make sure that you acknowledge your opposition in your writing, the other side of things, what people think, what they say. Never leave out an opposing viewpoint from writing, even if the view is better than your own. If you leave it out, it makes you look like you are refusing to acknowledge things, and then people may not trust you as an arguer. Also keep in mind that when you look at the opposition, you need to speak with about their point fairly and with very neutral language. Okay? You don't want to be inflammatory. Those people are going to be reading and they may be thinking and they may not trust you anymore. Let's move on to inventing your argument's content. So, before writing your argument, you need to be able to understand the issue as thoroughly as possible. That is the thing that people struggle with when they're writing, is presenting all sides of a controversy or a topic in a fair way. If somebody with an opposing viewpoint is reading your argument, they should be able to say, yes, that is a fair representation of my view. And they should not be offended by it or feel put off by it. If not, you need to look at that view and work on how you present it. Make sure you're not distorting opposing positions or overlooking weak points in your own position, because doing that will make a reader question whether you're being fair and presenting all sides of the argument in an even-handed way. If your position is truly stronger, you should be able to explain all sides and then demonstrate why your side's the better side to your reader. This is why I'm the best. So to be able to invent your content, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do inquiring, and that is identifying your topic. You need to choose a topic or question that is narrow enough for you to manage while allowing you to offer new insights. To do this, state your topic as a question and see if it is too broad. This will allow you to turn the answer into your thesis statement. New topics, as a point, are rare. You are never going to come up with a topic that nobody has ever talked about before. That's just how it is. New angles on topics, though, are there for you. And you need to consider your own experience with your topic and how that plays into this. Pay attention to what has changed and how recent events made your topic relevant today. That helps you out. So let me give you an example of identifying the topic here. This is too broad of a topic. Should we allow people to carry concealed handguns? I want you to stop and consider for just a second, why is it too broad of a topic? And how can you potentially narrow it down? All right. So, why is this too broad of a topic? Well, when you say, should we allow people to carry concealed handguns? Who do you mean by people? That is a very broad term to use. How are you narrowing this down and qualifying that? So how can you potentially narrow this down? Let's take a look. A better example is, should students, faculty, and staff be allowed to carry concealed handguns on college campuses? So how did this narrow it down? Well, it narrowed down who people were. students, faculty, and staff. It also narrowed down where the people were on college campuses. Take a second and consider why this is potentially too broad, though. Now, for some of you, you may be saying, well, Ms. Cravens, this isn't too broad at all. But when you say college campuses, what college campuses do you mean, and where do you mean? Because even in the state of Arkansas alone, there are over 20-something community colleges, which means two-year colleges. There are also four-year colleges and private colleges, and there are many of those throughout the United States. So when you say that is a very broad stroke. You have a very large umbrella still. So you want to narrow that umbrella down just a little bit more. So let's look at a better example from that one. So this one is qualifying the statement more, given the recent shooting at blank. Should we allow students, faculty, and staff to carry concealed handguns on our campus? So what it is doing is it's saying there was a recent shooting at this college or this place. So should we allow the people who are on our campus to carry it? It narrowed down the focus of the topic. That umbrella went from very huge, covering a wide swath of people and a wide area and places, to local. And then you can argue the local issues with that potentially and go from there. It works out really well. So when you're thinking about your own topic, think about narrowing it down. You can start with a very broad topic, but find ways to narrow it down. When you say people, who do you mean by people? If you don't qualify where in a statement like this, where do you mean? Those are the things to think about when narrowing down your topic. Next, for the inquiring part, you're going to identify the points of contention. Now, for this, you want to identify the major points on which your side and the opposing side differ. So you can do this different ways. This is totally up to you. I'm not going to require a certain way to do this, but you need to figure out where you differ from the other person or persons. So do a brainstorming list if you want to. Easy way to do this. 2 columns. You, them. In the left, write down your position and list all the points that you can think of that will support your argument. Everything you can think of. Doesn't matter how trivial it is, how important it is, just write them all down. That helps out. And then in the right column, write the opposing position and list the best arguments, not the worst, the best, for the other side's controversy. Try to see things from their perspective as well. What are their strongest arguments? Why do others hold these views or values? What goals are they trying to achieve that differ from yours? And then go through and look at them and put check marks next to 2 to 5 of the most important issues on which you disagree with the opposing side. So they say this, I do not agree with this. They say this, I really don't agree with this. They say this, I really don't agree with this. That's fine. You don't need all of them. You just need a few major points that will help you. These are your argument's major points of contention. Now, what are you going to do with those from there? Well, you're going to start researching. And I know for many of you, research may be a new thing. We will talk specifically about researching when we do the citing sources, on using and citing sources, as well as how to use and cite them. But you're going to use those major points of contention as your starting place for research. Now, most people, when they engage in research, they do this thing where they put in their topic and then they come up with 50 million different things. You don't want to do that. You want to be very specific with what you're looking for, content-wise. What you need to do, though, is research the opposing viewpoints first. It's going to help you find what they say and what you disagree with, and then see if your information will actually be better than theirs. And you can find the strengths and weaknesses in their own argument. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, you can shift your position with this. A lot of the times, research and exposure to other things allows people to learn and grow, and they change their points and their ideas about their topic. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. While researching, imagine you're arguing for the opposition. That will help you build up your own argument. What are your strongest points? What are your weakest points? How would you look at those? How would you address those? What kind of sources would you use to support these positions? Your goal in arguing is always to figure out why people hold a different view than you and potentially persuade them to think the way you think. Then you're going to find sources that support your position. The research should help you pinpoint the kinds of sources that your support is going to be. So you need to find credible sources, and we're going to talk more about this when we do using and citing sources that support your position and answer the criticisms that individuals hold against that. So your sources need to be credible. This is one of those things that when you consider credible sources, it's hard to get past because we really like Google. Google's fine to an extent. Never rely on it. Your sources should also address what other people say about your topic, the criticisms they make, what they're going to use against it. If they say, well, you believe X, Y, Z, and you can say, well, we believe that to an extent, but here's how we believe it. That will help you out. With research specifically, variety is the spice of research. Once upon a time, the internet really didn't exist for research. I used to have to use the library constantly, as in books. But you guys have online and print sources that are available to you now. So make sure you're using a variety of sources. You can do a mix of online and print. If you would like to do an empirical source, which is a survey, got to make sure you're doing the survey correctly though. But look for those that support all sides of the issues. With online and print sources, be careful about the sources you find online and in print. Look for factual sources and avoid sources that are too biased. So things like procon.org is too biased. That is a no source. No. A lot of my students love that site. You cannot use it. Same thing for Wikipedia. Many of you were told you cannot use Wikipedia because Wikipedia can be edited by the general public. And yes, that is true. Wikipedia should not be used as a source to make your argument, but you can use it to find sources. Okay? There are databases that exist out there, especially for the online sources. When you consider things that are factual, if it's published in a journal, journals tend to require peer reviews and peer studies, and there are people that are reading these and rejecting or doing whatever they need to do. It's a lot of work for people to get published in a journal, like a scientific journal and stuff like that. So you can do those. Google Scholar is useful, and it's free. You have a Google account, you can use Google Scholar. As are the databases that are available through the A&C Library's website. There's EBSCOhost and ProQuest are two great ones. And those are to give you the citation. Those are the two I'm most familiar with using, so I very highly suggest using those two. And I will show you later on in the class how to use them and how to use Google Scholar. In terms of media sources, those are great as well. You have a lot of these things just at your fingertips. You can use documentaries, podcasts. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube that is actually good factual information that are open for you to being used. Some of you might be familiar with TED Talks. Those are great to use. And you can look at those. Don't just rely on the online sources for your papers, though. Use those outside sources. Use a documentary that may help you out. Use a TED Talk, things like that. Just make sure it's not somebody who's out there for clickbait or rage bait. And you'll know it when you see that, though. You want to look for information that is credible and not too biased. And when I say credible, I mean, when you do your math homework, you are not going to come to me, the English instructor, and say, you know math, you can do this, help me out, because I am not a credible source on that. You will go to math instructors or math tutors. And you have to watch out for biases because they do exist, and a lot of people will skew very hard with their biases. So be aware of those and be careful of those. But make sure you have a variety. When you're researching, make sure that 3/4 or more of your research are from credible academic sources. Those are sources that are backed up with not fakes. Say, remind us today, guys. Facts, that word, data, and solid sources. Facts and data coming together is not a good word. So if you have to have 4 sources for an essay, 3/4 of that is 3 out of 4. If you have to have 2 sources, 3/4 would be, well, 1 out of 2. 3 sources, 2 out of 3. Over 3/4 or more of those should be from credible sources because that will help you out. And if you're not sure who the person is or what their qualifications are on talking to something, Google them. You can find people's information easily. Are they trustworthy? If you have eyesight problems, you don't go to a doctor who works on, gastrointestinal issues. You're going to go through an ophthalmologist because they work on 2 very different things and they have 2 very specific skill sets there. So keep that in mind. Variety is good, but just make sure it's from credible people. Along with researching, you're going to use reasoning, authority, and emotion in writing. Sounds familiar, yes? Logos, ethos, and pathos. We discussed these 3 things previously for the rhetorical analysis. We're going to look at them again for arguments and very specifically how they're used in argumentative writing. So let's first talk about reasoning or logos. In argumentative writing, you're going to use logical statements and examples as the reasoning. You're going to have reasons, which are your reasons, and then you're going to use the authority to back up those reasons. So reasons are going to be appealing to readers' common sense or belief. You shouldn't be wearing flip-flops and no socks and tiny shorts and a tank top when it's 30 degrees outside because it's cold, right? So logical statements specifically allow you to use the reader's existing beliefs to prove they should agree with a further claim that you're making. Logically, you should go from here to here to here with me. Examples allow you to illustrate your point or demonstrate that a pattern exists. So you can point out things, examples, stories. Those are great to use. From reasoning, you're going to shift into using authority or ethos. You can do this in 6 different ways in your writing. So with authority, you can use either your own experience or the reputation of others to support your argument. That's what we talked about when we did rhetorical analysis. Ethos was using somebody else's reputation and experience to support the claim. In arguments specifically, you can use things like practicality, which shows readers that your concern is about solving problems and getting things done. You can look at ethical principles with ethos, which is arguing for an outcome that meets a specific set of ethical principles. You can look at rights, which are human rights or constitutional rights to back up your claim. People are very, very familiar with those kind of arguments. You can even look at laws and argue things that are in line with civic laws that exist. You can look at things like utilitarianism, which is arguing that your position is beneficial for the majority. Not everybody, but the majority of people. Or with authority and ethos, you can look at goodwill. You have the reader's best interest in mind, not just your own interest. And some of these things that you may see that people use them as well. You need to be aware of how they use them and see how they use them. And then, of course, we have emotion, ethos, pathos. The thing with emotion is they need to be suitable in the use because emotions can be manipulative, as we know. When you looked at the rhetorical analysis and you looked at your ad, it may have been using things to emotionally manipulate you. Imagery, music, all that kind of stuff. When you think about emotion, you can list positive and negative emotions associated with your topic or with your side. You can do this by offering things like promise of gain, which is demonstrating that you agree with me and you'll get things by agreeing with me. There's also a promise of enjoyment, which is where you show that when you accept what I say, my position is going to give you something that's more satisfactory in the long run. There's fear of loss. Not agreeing may cause the loss of valued things to you. Fear of pain. Not agreeing will cause feelings of pain, sadness, frustration, embarrassment, loneliness, things like that. And then there's expressions of anger or distrust and disgust. That's where you share feelings of anger or distress and disgust with things. If you're using emotions, you want to use positive emotions as much as possible. Negative emotions should be used sparingly because it is, again, manipulative. And those things can lead into actual logical fallacies in arguments, which, what a great segue into avoiding logical fallacies. Did on purpose. For some of you, you may be going, Miss Cravens, what is a logical fallacy? And I understand that. Maybe a new thing to you. A logical fallacy is just an error in somebody's reasoning. And you need to be able to view these and know these and see these in other people's arguments because it will help strengthen your own writing. You want to avoid them because they undermine your writing. They undercut the point you're trying to make. They can also keep you from gaining a full understanding of the issue because the fallacies lead to inaccurate or ambiguous conclusions that exist out there. You don't want that. When you're doing opposing viewpoints and you see that an opposing viewpoint depends on a fallacy, you can point that out and say, look, this is a fallacious argument. It doesn't work. Here's what it's doing, and here's how it needs to work. You don't attack and be like, well, this is stupid. Because when you're attacked, you don't want to listen. But you do want to point out that they have a weaker argument there. Now, fallacies can exist for three primary reasons, and most of them fall under one of these categories. False or weak premises. Look at that misspelling there. You have irrelevance or ambiguity. False or weak premises is where the author is overreaching to make a point. They use a false or weak premise, or they rely on comparisons or authorities that are inappropriate. Irrelevance is where you're trying to distract readers from the point and bring up issues that are besides the point. And then ambiguity is where the author clouds the issue by using things like circular reasoning, arguing against a position no one is defending, straw man, or presenting the reader with an unreasonable choice of options. Okay? Logical fallacies do not prove that someone is wrong about a topic. It means the person is using weak or improper reasoning to reach his or her conclusion, and they need to better understand the topic and the conclusion they're trying to get to. Sometimes people will use them deliberately because they know that people do not understand them, and they can trip you up in arguments and make you look like you have the weaker argument because they are very loud and very bold when they use logical fallacies. Fallacies are just errors in reasoning or thinking. They're not wrong, they're just an error. It's good to know how to spot them, though, so you can point out the reasoning error and then better improve your own writing in the long run. There are quite a few logical fallacies that exist, but I want to show you some players in the game. First, you have circular reasoning, or sometimes it's called begging the question. So you use the claim as evidence by repeating the claim in different words. So you just go around in a circular reasoning over and over and over. So the example is, conservatives believe in hard work and strong values. That's why most Americans are conservatives. You don't have to be conservative to believe in hard work and strong values. It's just going back to the point you made. You didn't make a real point there. Then you have ad hominem attacks. People are very fond of these in their arguments. That's where you attack the character of the person rather than the actual argument. So an example, Mary has no credibility on the smoking ban issue because she was once a smoker herself. Well, what does that have to do with Mary potentially wanting to ban it now? You can't attack a person to bring stuff up. Then we have red herrings. I always make a reference to a pup named Scooby-Doo with this, but nobody gets it, which makes me feel really old. But red herring is a character in a pup named Scooby-Doo. A red herring is meant to distract readers from the main issue by raising an irrelevant point. Of course, people who live in the suburbs don't believe racism and sexism exist. How's that relevant to that? You see? You often get red herrings in movies where they'll bring somebody in, you'll be like, oh my God, that's the killer. And then you find out later it's not. That's fun. Then we have the ad populum fallacy. And I usually bring this up, and I bring up with this one that your mamas were probably really fond of this one. That's the bandwagon fallacy. This is where you suggest that a person should agree to something because it is popular. when I say your mom has probably used this, it's, would you jump off a bridge if your friends did? That's what my mom would say when I wanted to do something. And then you see over 1,000 people have decided to sign up, so you should too. Well, just because it's popular doesn't mean I should do it. We have the either or fallacy, which is a false dilemma as well. So you argue that there are only two sides to an option and only one is correct. No argument works that way, guys. There's not just two sides to an argument. There are many sides. So we either buy this car now or we spend the rest of the year walking to school. Probably not how that works. And then there's slippery slope. So that is suggesting that one event will automatically lead to a chain of other events. It's that crazy thing where somebody says, well, if you smoke one cigarette, then you're going to wind up smoking weed, and then you're going to do heroin and crack cocaine, and then by the time you're 20, you're going to be that slippery slope, like just this crazy downward slide into insanity. These are just a few of them, though. There's so many different fallacies out there, and you can look them up, but just be aware of these things where people are using reasoning, and if to you it seems like that doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. And I want to show you a real life example of this that I found. So, scrolling through the Book of Faces, one of my friends reposted this. And the focus on this is going to be down here in the writing. It says, I just read in a news article that the Mississippi teacher pay raise almost didn't get through the political red tape because the House and Senate were fighting over who got credit for it. The same article said, the starting salary for a Mississippi teacher with a bachelor's degree is $37,000 for the current school year, according to the State Department of Education. Meanwhile, this is the pay for Chick-fil-A workers in Oxford. One would almost assume we value our chicken sandwiches more than the education of our children. Now, this is a fallacious argument to make, because these two things are not related to each other at all. The government does not dictate what Chick-fil-A pays their workers. They do dictate what they have to minimally pay their workers. But the government does not pay them out of their own pockets. Teachers are, though, a government-funded position, and therefore the government decides that. These two things do not go together. But somebody's trying to make that point, and you can see the issue with this. It's not that we value chicken sandwiches more than the education of our children. It's that a company is able to decide what they want to pay their people, whereas the government is deciding it as well. And those things tie into who you put into place in the government. So this is a fallacious argument. You can't rely on this argument. It's an argument where you can say, well, I kind of get it, but they're not related. It's the whole thing where somebody says, well, that's apples and oranges. This is apples and oranges. And therefore, it doesn't work in the argument itself. So keep that kind of thing in mind. Don't compare two things that have nothing to do with each other. The only thing this has to do with is the pay and how potentially grossly underpaid teachers are compared to everyday workers. But it's not about who we value more, because it's a company, and companies can pay their people what they want. They can pay them the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, because everybody has to pay federal minimum wage, or they can set their pay. So now let's look at the characteristics of argument essays. These are things I want you to remember. The argument is going to focus on arguable, narrowly defined issues, and issues of controversy, problem, or idea about which people disagree. We're going to talk about topics and how to choose an issue later on. An argument is going to have an argumentative thesis that makes a specific claim and may call for action. You need to make a clear and specific claim in your writing, one that states the position on the issue clearly. While all arguments make and support a claim, some call for specific action to be taken with the claim. Your claim will be more convincing if you qualify it by using words and phrases as like probably, often, and for the most part. An argument is also going to be effective because effective arguments are logical. So you are going to use either inductive or deductive reasoning with this. Inductive reasoning begins with evidence and moves to conclusion. Deductive reasoning begins with an accepted statement or premise and shows how conclusion follows from it. Okay? You're going to use your evidence to go to a conclusion. Effective arguments depend on careful audience analysis as well. This is something that I know many of you are still struggling with doing. I am not your audience. Your peers, the people who will be reading this paper, are your audience. So you need to analyze that audience and understand that audience. I'm grading it for a grade, yes, but I consider, who are you writing this for? Why are you writing it for them? There are 3 different types of audiences that exist: agreeing, neutral, or disagreeing. The agreeing audience are the easiest people to write for because they agree with you. You never have a fully agreeing audience. Neutral or wavering audiences may be familiar, but they may have questions or misunderstandings about the issue. I'm not sure about those. Disagreeing audiences are the people you should be writing for, people who are completely opposite of you. So you have to establish common ground, mention shared interests, concerns, values, experience. Never consider that your audience fully agrees with you. They never do. Never consider that they're neutral and they may not be either agreeing or disagreeing. Always approach them as a disagreeing audience that you're trying to win over with your charisma in your writing. Effective arguments are also going to present reasons and evidence that readers are going to find compelling. Reason is a general statement that backs up a claim. Here's my reasoning. That is your argument, your evidence, your reasons. So you are saying this does not work because of this. The evidence is going to back up your reasoning. So you have your reasoning, your points you're making, your evidence backs up your reasoning. Don't choose evidence to make your reason. Make your reasons and find evidence that fit with that. But do choose evidence and reasonings that will appeal to your audience. Okay? One thing to keep in mind is that your evidence does need to be very relevant, and we will talk about that in the Using and Citing Sources lecture, but it needs to be current. Much like your topic, your evidence also has to be current. Effective arguments are going to appeal to readers' needs and values. How does this apply to me? How does it apply to my needs? How does it apply to my values? Emotional appeals can help strengthen and support a sound argument. The needs can be biological or psychological or physiological, and values are principles or qualities that readers consider important, worthwhile, and desirable. So how does this apply to me as the reader, or your audience as a reader? Effective arguments recognize alternative views. Again, acknowledge your opposition. They're there, they're not going away. You have to recognize them. An argument is going to force you to think about your claim and others' viewpoints. So when you're doing this, you need to acknowledge, accommodate, or refute. So you can acknowledge their point and say, hey, this is better than mine. We're going to go with this one, but I have other better points. You can accommodate it and say, hey, this point's good, but let's adjust it to fit with this point as well of mine. Or you can refute it. Hey, this point is a much weaker idea. I have a better one. Here it is. One of the 3. Acknowledge, accommodate, or refute. Go that way. So remember those things about argumentative essays. Those are the characteristics that they have. Your argumentative essay, though, is going to be a little bit different. You have never done one of these before, probably, and it's very intentional of me for doing this. I don't want you guys to just write me a position paper. I believe this, and I'm going to say this. I don't want that. I want you to do something different and think about arguing in different ways, because there are different types of arguments that exist in the world. So yours is going to be a proposing a solution argument. So we're going to start out with the introduction. Make it engaging. It's going to have a thesis statement. Your introduction should prepare your readers for your argument. We've talked about introductions before. Start with a grabber or a lead. Look for something that's going to get your readers' attention. Broader discussion of the topic that leads down to the narrowed thesis statement. Never say, this paper is going to be about this right off the bat. That is not a good introduction. Offer background information if it's needed. Identify your topic. State your purpose. Tell us what we're doing. And then give me your thesis statement. Argumentative thesis statement. Keep that in mind. We've discussed these before in earlier lectures. You may have to go back to those. Then you're going to get into the body of the essay, which is the problem. You're doing a proposing a solution essay, an issue of recommendation. You're going to lay out the problem with your topic, how it is a problem, why it is a problem, where it is a problem, etc., etc. And you will see that in the student example that you read, that she shows you how it's a problem and why it's a problem and where it's a problem. Make sure that you're effectively arguing why your topic is a problem. This is where you're going to be using your sources. Show me the data. Show me why this is an issue. If I'm going to talk about the issue of global warming, I need to find issue in data that backs up why it's an issue, especially here. Some of you probably are sitting here going, yeah, Arkansas, yeah, it feels weird. You're going to be stating that this is a problem, but you may also recognize that in this part that other people don't think that this is a problem specifically. So acknowledge that or refute it. Then you're going to give me the solution, which is still the body of your essay. The solution is going to be things you offer to your reader to fix the problem. How do we fix this issue? How is this a reasonable, attainable way to fix it? There can be one way to fix it or numerous ways to fix it, depending on your topic. But your solutions do need to be attainable and plausible. So use your sources here also. When we talk about things like gas prices, saying, well, everybody should buy an electric car. Not everybody can afford an electric car, A. But B, infrastructure in certain places is not built for electric cars. I don't think there's any electric charging stations around where I live. I would be in trouble if I had to have an electric car and relied on that. So, introduction with the argumentative thesis. This is the issue. Give me the issue itself, the problem. What is your topic? How is it a problem? Why is it a problem? Where's the problem at? Then give me the solution and the solutions. The conclusion is ended on a high note. You can end your essay at the conclusion with the solutions. That can be your conclusion, or it can be its own separate thing. It's up to you. When you look at the student example, you will see that her conclusion actually is the solutions as well. So she ends there. A few things I want to remind you, though. Do not make announcements in your writing. Do not say, I will argue, this paper will argue, this paper is going to show you, or I think, I believe, I know. The only time you should be saying the word I in a story, referring to yourself, is if you're telling me a story about yourself. I know you think these things. I know you know these things. State them clearly to me right off the bat. Citations are going to be required in this essay. There's going to be a whole lecture on that. And also, last but not least, one idea per paragraph. Each paragraph should be about one topic choice. You guys should know how to write paragraphs. Something that you learned in middle school. Keep that thing in mind. One topic choice, discuss that entire topic, transition, new topic, new paragraph. Work to do for this. You have a lecture discussion for this, so please remember to do that. Your posts are due by Tuesday. And then also remember, your first point of contact in terms of discussions or questions should be your cohort. You can email them through the portal. When you do that, please always remember to include me in any email conversations you have with classmates concerning class. Second point of contact is myself. You have my email. You can also email me through the portal. This is going to be a little bit different of an essay. It's not as weird as the eulogy, but it's different because you've probably never written an essay like this before. But it will be fun. I promise. I look forward to seeing where you guys are going to go with this and the topics you choose. Have a great day, guys. Bye.